I'd bring a survival manual with me.
Ooh, that's like if I had a mic.
Yeah. I,
It's a good one.
I mean, but eventually it got supplanted by,
Oh my God.
and it frustrates me that so many booktube channels spend far more time talking about books that they haven't read than books that
It's a
they
great point.
have read.
Hey everyone. So there are booktubers and there are booktubers.
Welcome to the library ladder.
And today, my guest is someone that I and so many of us in the bookish community look up to because of so many reasons. Obviously, his breadth of knowledge, his incredible over 10,000 books, I believe, library, his videos in which he shares his knowledge with us. But most of all, the real reason is the sexy, the deep voice of Bridger from the library ladder. So, Bridger, thank you so much for joining me in today's episode number 8 of Why Sci-Fi. Welcome, Bridger. Thank you for joining me.
Well, thank you, Bart. I really appreciated the invitation when you extended it to me a few weeks ago, and I guess I'm the lucky magic 8 ball number for
Lucky
this
eights.
episode. I'll take that. So this is going to be fun. I really am looking forward to this. This is not something that I do all that often, and whenever I do have the opportunity, it's something that I really treasure. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my honor, really. And did I misspoke when I said 10,000? Is that how many books you have? Am I right? I think I heard you say that one time.
It is in that neighborhood. I haven't done an actual physical. I mean, I've counted up close to 10,000, but I
Okay.
haven't counted all of them. It is probably at this point because that estimate was one that I came up with almost 4 years ago, or actually probably over 4 years ago at this point. So it's over 10,000 at this point. Lots of different genres.
Of course, of course. But on this show, we're going to concentrate a little bit on science fiction, perhaps fantasy a bit too, speculative genres. But science fiction is really my number one love. And I know it's something that's near and dear to your heart. And the first question I'll have for you, before I actually ask the question, I wanted just to bring something up because I thought I love quotes also. And I read a quote by Frederick Paul. And I just recently finished Gateway, by the way, the first Frederick Paul book that I read. And while there were some issues there, I really enjoyed it. I loved the book. I thought it was interesting, well written, fascinating. So Frederick Paul, I remembered the quote that I heard by him, and the quote I have it here is good, something like good science fiction. Good science fiction should predict not the car, but the traffic jam. I thought that was really interesting. So go beyond the obvious, beyond just the idea, right? And see how that idea, that future concept, conceptual breakthrough, how it affects humans. What is it going to do to us? So I thought that was interesting. And my first question is, what is it about science fiction that draws you in?
I love that question, and I have heard that quote before, and I was trying to remember what it came from, and I wonder if I mean it could have been any. I mean, he wrote so many things, and he wrote the forewords, introductions to many anthologies and other books, but I almost want to say that came from his autobiography, which is I think titled "Remembering the Future."
Okay.
Or that might be somebody else's autobiography, another science fiction author. I think that's Pohl's, which is a very good read, by the way. If you want more of that type of insight into what was motivating the early pioneers of the genre, that's one of the good places to start.
Okay.
Anyway, but back to your question. I actually feel very similar to what you expressed in how science fiction is really a genre of unlimited opportunities to learn, to explore, to imagine. I mean, it's maybe unlimited is maybe not well. Actually, I guess it is. I have this waging debate inside me. I have voices inside my head. Yes, that
Let him out. Let him out.
right.
They're
There's
all welcome.
there's the analytical side of me, and then there's the more softer side, or
Okay.
that's more attuned to emotions or feeling or gestalt, if you want to think of it that way. And I'm also a lawyer, so I quibble with myself on things too. So like, yeah, I make this statement. Then I realize, well, I can't make that statement because that's an absolute, and absolutes are never correct. An absolute, you want to avoid absolute statements because there's always an exception. Always, which of course
Never
is an
say never.
absolute. So anyway, the the thing about science fiction, and a lot of this is semantic, how are we defining the term science fiction? Does it actually have to have science in it or not? A lot of science fiction actually doesn't have much science, if any, if you look at how it's categorized for marketing purposes or just how it's been described by book reviewers or readers or others, because there's a quote, and I don't remember who said this, that science fiction is basically anything about the future. If it's a book about the future, it is by definition science fiction.
Mhm.
I don't happen to agree with that quote, but that is one worldview. So, of course, obviously, if you say there are unlimited opportunities to explore all kinds of ideas and things, yes, if you take the view that science fiction is about the future, well, the future is unlimited. At least I hope so. And if we live in a multiverse, of course, there are infinite possible paths that we might take as we go forward into the future. So, science fiction, I've always been attracted to the novelty of the stories or the ideas, the opportunity to learn from them. I don't read as much science fiction now as I used to. I devoured science fiction as a kid and as a young adult in my 20s, read lots of science fiction. Now I read some, but I read a lot of other genres too. And I have found that when I was exposed to it at a young age, a lot of the ideas in the books for me were new. I mean, they really were causing me to stop and think and learn new scientific concepts or learn about different potential issues that might arise. The traffic jams, as
Yeah.
you referred to earlier, that I hadn't really thought of before. Like, isn't scientific progress always good? It's like, well, actually, not always, and many times it can create more problems than it solves. So the idea of imagining all of those different potential outcomes and potential consequences, good and bad, is a great thing about science fiction. As I got older, the ideas stopped being as new.
Mhm.
And so as I was reading science fiction going forward, I really started to prioritize the stories that seemed like they were treading new ground, like they were exploring a new aspect of science fiction. And I tend to prefer science fiction that actually has science in it,
Mhm.
and or just has different settings, different ideas that I haven't really, like I said, haven't really explored before, haven't been exposed to. And different periods of time in science fiction history, and I will probably get to this later in the conversation, but there are different stages of science fiction's evolution that I tend to enjoy more than others. And actually, the most recent stage, our current stage, is not one of my favorites.
Mhm.
So,
I think many science fiction readers would agree with that, even though there are some excellent authors who do write hard science fiction. Maybe Alistair Reynolds, for example. I enjoyed quite a few of his books, but we do seem to. And do you think that's because so many of the grand ideas have already been kind of all the juice has been squeezed out of them previously? Is that the problem with the new?
it's partly that.
Mhm.
And I love it when I find that an author is finding new juice. I mean, I really, really like that. I also like it sometimes, not always, when science fiction authors create more of a hybrid
Okay.
where, like, science fiction and historical fiction. To me, that is a magical combination. Science fiction and fantasy, not so magical, even though
Yeah.
it is fantastical. And this is one of the issues I have with current day science fiction. A lot of it is really just fantasy in an outer space setting or a
Yeah.
futuristic setting or a whatever is it's called science fiction, but it's really just window dressing for a fantasy story or a literary fiction story or which again, I'm not saying science fiction and literary fiction are mutually exclusive. Not at all. There's lots of overlap between them. And there's some fantastic literary science fiction. But there's an awful lot of just pure literary fiction that has nothing to do with science,
Yeah.
but it has a setting that makes it seem like science fiction. And some of them are quite good. So I'm not panning them, categorically. But when I'm in the mood for science fiction, that's not what I'm in the mood for. I want to be really pushed to think more, pushed to think about new ideas, new concepts, new ways of resolving problems or situations, new ways to untangle the traffic jams.
Yeah.
And that is not what I'm finding in a lot of recent science fiction. Certainly, again, that's not a categorical condemnation of all recent science fiction. I've read some really, really good science fiction recently. I mean, last year I read Arkady Martin's Texcalan duology, which I loved. That was really, really terrific.
Interesting.
And
If I
I have Ada Palmer's
Terra,
Terra Ignota
Adam,
on my
yeah.
TBR list. I mean, I'm starting
Same.
it, I hope, by the end of this year. So
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is the way you put this in words, something that I was thinking about. So I'm glad that we're on the same page. I was actually speaking at a book signing, book event with author of she's a fantasy author mostly, but she's writing science fiction. Fonda Lee. Fonda Lee is
Oh,
the author. The Jade trilogy, I think, is her probably most famous work. And I asked her because she mentioned that she's writing a science fiction book, and I asked her if she has to kind of switch something in her creative brain as to go from fantasy, that setting, to science fiction, and she was almost surprised, or maybe even more than surprised by the question, and she just dismissed it totally. She said there's no difference between science fiction and fantasy. And I had to think about it, because obviously she's an author, she's a successful author, so she probably knows better than me. But I felt, yes, there's probably no difference in the way you're approaching it. But if you're really approaching it from the scientific and you're taking that seriously, that science fiction, then there is a little bit of a different approach when we're looking for the novum in a book, or the conceptual
right,
breakthroughs, things like that, as opposed to just setting your story on another planet and calling it science fiction. So I think
right.
you kind of helped me understand that now.
I, I'm somewhat allergic to labels and you know, creating, science fiction means X. This is the definition. It's like, no, 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 no. I mean, that's semantics. You
Yeah,
can give it all kinds of different definitions, and all of them are valid in the context of how they are specifically being used. Usually, I mean, sometimes they might actually be invalid if the person doesn't know what they're talking about. But you can make a very, compelling, plausible argument for any number of different definitions for what is or is not science fiction, or that I generally have an affinity for, I think it was Ray Bradbury's definition, which is essentially it's the difference between the possible and the impossible.
yes,
And with
that,
possible also including the plausible. If the technology doesn't exist today, but it's plausible that the technology could exist in the future, that fits under possible. And that's a limiting factor on science fiction,
mhm,
because it has to be plausible
yeah,
to be science fiction. Whereas fantasy, anything goes.
yeah,
Whatever you want, you can make it up. it doesn't have to obey the laws of physics. It doesn't have to. Yeah, there's no conservation of mass is required in fantasy. Gravity works in very mysterious ways in fantasy that doesn't necessarily apply in science fiction. So and that is one of my frustrations with a lot of sort of the hybrid science fiction fantasy or science fantasy works is they don't take the science seriously. And so it's like watching a Marvel superhero movie where you know that these superheroes are completely ignoring the laws of physics. And I don't care how strong you are. I don't care anything. I mean, literally, if you apply force to something, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And that never or rarely happens in those types of stories because it kind of complicates the storytelling for them. And I see that in a lot of science fantasy. Pierce Brown's Red Rising trilogy. I've only read the first 3 books. And
I read only the first one and I kind of bounced off of it. I didn't love it.
Yeah, it's light, it's entertaining, and it's completely ridiculous and implausible. And I mean, the whole world building makes absolutely no sense if you really think about how sustainable that system is. It's not sustainable at all. And yet it's written in a way that the author clearly wants you to think that this could really happen, that this is science fiction. It's like, no, this is fantasy set in outer space.
Yeah.
So I do get a little, I do react a little bit when I read people describing this as great science fiction. No, it's not science fiction. Not
I think the
in the
redeeming quality,
traditional sense of what science fiction is. Now, of course, if you go way far back, Jack Williamson back in the 1930s was writing space operas that are pure space fantasy.
yeah, Paul P.
I mean, there's the science makes no sense. It's silly super science. So I'm not limiting this at all to the modern day type writers. These types of stories have been written for a very, very long time, and they can be very fun. I mean, I did have fun reading the Red Rising trilogy, but I really didn't feel the need to continue beyond. And I did feel a little frustrated by it. Even as I was enjoying it, I thought, this is just too much of a internal conflict for me, that I'm trying to treat this as something plausible, but the other part of my brain is saying, no, this is not plausible. And it has to do sort of with how what the author's intent is. If the author clearly wants you to treat this like science fiction, and again, I'm not limiting this to hard science fiction. I mean, science fiction means just something that's rigorous, something that's grounded in, scientific study and possibility. And if that's clearly the author's intent, that's how, as a reader, I'm going to take it. On the other hand, if the author's intent is clearly to write it as something fantastical or as satire, for example, then that's how, as a reader, I'm going to take it. And how I respond is going to be very different, because with one, I can suspend disbelief readily because the author wants me to suspend disbelief, because the author is very clear in how they've written the story that this is not real and can never be real. Mm-hmm. But when the author is trying to make you think that, yes, this could be real, and my brain is telling me, no, it always takes me out of the story.
Yes, I have a question for you. If I have a question for you, because I'm thinking that perhaps there may be a redeeming quality to books like Red Rising in this sense that you're looking at it obviously through your many years of reading all kinds of science fiction and the baggage that you have, in a positive sense, baggage that you bring into it. But what about the new readers who are perhaps who would not be able to get through a really hard science fiction book by maybe Greg Egan, like Permutation City, Diaspora, these types of really heavy reads that really challenge you, right? But for them, this may be like a gateway into discovering some ideas in a softer, more easy to digest package. What do you think about that?
I agree with that.
Okay.
I have no issue with that at all. It's more about managing their expectations. And
Mhm.
so if they're being told that this is science fiction, again, it's semantics and very open to debate as to what this actually means. But if they're being told this is the best science fiction book that you can ever read, which I have seen people say things like that. This is
Yeah.
the greatest science fiction book, or they'll say the same thing about Sun Eater, for example,
Yeah.
which is another science fantasy that is like this is not the greatest science fiction,
Yeah.
but I think it's a good gateway. I
Yeah.
mean, it can be a really nice introduction to some of the same kinds of ideas, but not really explored very rigorously. I mean, there's a lot of fantasy that is very, very rigorous in the sense that it's tackling really weighty ideas and themes and philosophies. And so I'm not at all making the statement that science fiction is better than fantasy. It's really just how the author approaches it and whether they're really being honest with the reader in a sense of giving them what the reader, well, okay, the lawyer in me saying, no, you really can't make that argument. That's not a good argument.
Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult.
This is a really tough one because I absolutely, I fully believe that if people are reading, even if they're reading some of the worst prose ever written, that's better than not reading at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to be a snob at all about, well, this is good and this is bad. It's like all reading is good.
Yeah.
It's just I would hope that if you're going to be reading some of the stuff that's maybe not as challenging, not as eloquently written, or things that have a very limited vocabulary and very plot driven, but not really exploring more emotional depth or thematic depth. Hopefully people will gravitate toward that eventually.
Yeah.
I mean, I did when I was younger. I loved plot stuff. Plot was great. Give me lots of plot. Give me lots of action. And it was interesting when there were other ideas, but I wasn't really focused on the weightier themes and ideas. Although I think they did sort of gradually take up residence in my brain, just accumulation over time where I finally realized, oh, that's what I'm seeing or that's what I'm reading. That's how these things connect to one another.
Interesting. Yeah.
And now I'm much more focused on those types of things than I am on plot, although I still do enjoy a good plot.
Of course, a
But
good
I
story. Who
like
doesn't love a good story?
good stories, great.
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in things that are combining things in new and novel ways, things that are making me think about topics or issues in ways that I hadn't really thought of before. And most of the sort of lightweight science fiction or fantasy doesn't really engage me in that way. Even the old stuff. I mean, I'll read some of the old stuff and I'll love it, but it's more nostalgia.
Yeah.
Whereas part of me is going, today, if I were reading this for the first time today, I probably would not enjoy it nearly as much. Although I can always put a sort of a lens in front of my reading, and I do this a lot when I'm reading older works, is I try to view it through the eyes of the original readers,
Right.
the contemporary readers at the time it was published. And this is their first encounter with this idea. This is their first encounter with this author. This for them is new, and this is actually shaping how they think, how they feel, and what their preferences are going forward. This is shaping other authors who are reading this and going, wow, I really like that. I want to do something like that, only see if I can do it better or extend it in ways that haven't been done before. I love reading them in through that lens because it allows me to connect the dots. It lets me see, oh, so this is the through line that connects all of these authors and stories. And I can see how, this story written in the 1930s directly influenced something that was written in the 1970s.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
George
a great
Lucas got the whole idea of a tractor beam. Where did that come from? That came from Jack Williamson's Legion of Time. No, Legion of Space
okay.
novel in like 1933 or something like that. It came straight out of that. It's
Yeah.
still hokey science
Well,
fantasy, but hey, it's
it's
fun.
fun. It's fun. It's fun, and it's a part of our culture. And it's an amazing way to read older books. I think, and by through that lens, where you're putting yourself maybe in a seat of someone who was reading it for the first time in 1950 during Cold War era, and imagining this future scenario, maybe reading about artificial intelligence, things that we are living through right now. So yeah, looking at books through this lens, I think is often fascinating, and I think necessary with many books. Older science fiction books. Maybe we'll get into some of the problematic things that may sometimes creep into the storytelling. But just to keep things a little bit lighter, I think we talked quite a bit about science fiction, kind of general, big scope. What about some books specifically? I asked you if you have a book, or maybe more than one book. Seeing how big your library is, maybe it's impossible just to pull out one. Anything that you feel proud to own? Maybe it's the value, monetary value, or perhaps just to you as a person, as a reader, some nostalgia. Any book you could show our viewers that you're happy to have on your shelves.
I did bring a few.
Okay, a few.
It most are part of a theme.
Okay.
I so I actually have a lot of science fiction in my collection. I'm a preservationist at heart, so I've been trying to for over 40 years now. I mean, this has been going on since I was in my early teens, if not younger. It's been a
Hmm.
long time, closing in on 50 years maybe. Actually, trying to just collect the ones that I think are either my favorites or the ones that have had the greatest impact on the genre, the ones that are just have significance.
Mhm.
And so I have hardcover first editions of just about every classic science fiction novel of significance that you can name. There are a few exceptions. There are a few sort of holy grails that I'm still holding out hope that I can get a copy of at some point, but odds are low at this point that I'll be able to find one at a reasonable price. I had the luxury of doing a lot of my collecting, most of my collecting, decades ago, when it was a lot easier to find classic science fiction at garage sale prices.
Yeah.
I now look and go, my goodness, some of these online booksellers that have copies of the books that I have in my shelves, and they're asking just exorbitant prices. So I have several shelves right up there that are nothing but
Science fiction.
science fiction first editions, a great many of them signed.
Oh my goodness. And I'll just jump in quickly and say that you have and I'll link the video down below. You have a fantastic video that I watched a long time ago where you talk about collecting and you kind of break it down very scientifically into how to approach a book, how to know if you're paying the right price for the book, which I thought was very interesting. I'm myself not a huge collector. I do like to read books and I collect the ones that I enjoy reading, but you're an inspiration. And I think that video is fantastic. If anyone is interested in collecting books the right way, I'll link the video.
Right. Without spending a lot of money.
Yes.
I can honestly, I have spent more money on shelving than I have on books in my lifetime. And I have 10,000 books.
Yeah.
Now, shelves are kind of expensive, but it's anyway. I'm going to bring one. Okay, now I'm not going to start with this one. I'm going to start with a different one. Okay. Let me start with I'm going to go back. So up on the shelves, I actually have an entire shelf that's nothing but first editions of H.G. Wells and Jules Verne.
Okay.
I
Amazing.
didn't bring them all down, but I did bring one down. And that is, okay, I need to create a little space here. This is, oh, I grabbed the wrong one.
It's a funny
This is
how.
In Search of the Castaways. Okay, this is supposed to be 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea
Ooh,
because they're side by side in the shelf and they're both this size and green with gold gilt. Oh, let me get it in front of the camera.
there
There
we
we
go.
go.
Oh my
So this
goodness.
is In Search of the Castaways by Jules Verne. This is a US edition. And it's beautiful, lots of illustrations. I'm sorry I did not pull down 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
That's okay. Captain
The
Nemo.
20,000
I love
the
that book.
20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is unique because it is the closest thing to a first edition that you can find. Because in the U.S. edition. So in the U.S., the publisher printed a full print run of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea back in 1872, 1873, something like that. And before they could distribute them, they had a warehouse fire. And that entire print run burned up, except for what's estimated to be around maybe 50 copies. Those 50 copies you cannot find. I mean,
Priceless.
those are being hoarded by collectors and libraries and museums. So after the warehouse fire, the publisher said, okay, well, let's do another print run, which will in effect be the first print run because it'll be the
Yeah.
first one that actually went out and was sold to the public. And so I have a pristine copy of that, second printing, but technically, or is
First.
effectively a first printing of 20,000 Leagues. And it's one of the earliest science fiction books I read as a kid. So it's one that I really
Do you know
treasure.
when I read the book, I did not realize I was reading science fiction. I read it when I was maybe 12, 11, 12, 13. I don't know exactly. I read it in Polish because I lived in Poland, in Warsaw back then. Polish is my first language. And I didn't realize I was reading something that could be classified as science fiction, one of the early science fiction works, in fact. That's a great book.
Yeah, I mean, it reads, today it reads more like adventure fiction.
Yeah,
But to readers back in the 19th century, it was a travel log. It was a scientific sort of exploration of the undersea world. This was for them, for many, many, many readers. This was their introduction to the scientific method, because what Professor Arondax, I think his name is. He's he's a scientist.
mhm.
And Nemo himself is very, very interested in conducting experiments and studies, scientific studies.
Inventor.
And so there's that whole idea of science. For many readers, they were just getting introduced to that
Mhm.
through what Verne was doing. Now, Verne was doing a lot of other things, and a lot of this actual science that Verne talks about isn't the best science. Some of it might have been what they thought was correct back then, and some of it he just kind of made up because, hey, he didn't know the answer, so I'm going to make up an answer, which there's a long tradition of that in the science fiction genre. So on this theme, I'm going to go sort of chronologically,
Okay.
but I'm going to go. So the theme is books that science fiction books that shaped me. So I'm really focusing on books that I read as a kid.
Okay.
And I want to focus on this because one of my great frustrations is that there are not nearly enough science fiction books being published for kids, being written for kids these days.
It's a
And
good.
so if you look back at sort of just the massive growth in science and technology, the progress that was made throughout the 20th century, a lot of that, I mean, an enormous amount of that was fueled by the imagination and inspiration that came from science fiction ideas, science fiction authors who were imagining things. And then people would read that and go, I wonder if that's actually possible. Let me go study this. Let me figure out, can I actually do this? And so there were lots of inventions that first came from the minds of authors just thinking, wouldn't it be nice if there was a device that could do this? Or wouldn't it be really cool if, there was a way for humans to fly? And they imagine it. And so then you say, okay, well, maybe this can be done. And anyway, one of my foremost interests as a book collector is children's books. It was actually the impetus for me starting my channel was I was planning to primarily talk about children's books.
Oh, interesting.
When I started my channel. I was going to talk about other stuff too, but I had been helping to run a book club for middle grade readers at my kids' school for several years, and we kind of read a mix of old and new children's books, middle grade books, mostly new ones. And I was really frustrated at some of the trends that I was seeing in those children's books, and some of the gaps that were occurring. I mean, I noticed, mystery fiction used to be, just half of all the children's books that were written back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, it seemed, were mysteries of some kind. These days, mysteries are few and far between. There are some, but for children, not a lot of them. Science fiction was much the same way. There were a lot of science fiction books written for kids, or younger-ish readers. Even if they weren't specifically for kids, they were maybe targeted at teenagers. But kids would read them because they were relatively clean. There really wasn't much that was too objectionable in those books at that point in time, back in the 50s and 60s, and or even going farther back to the really far back. So this is you get up. There we go. Everything is backwards here, so I've got to remember which way is the is the mirror going.
Beautiful.
Right. So this is like early steampunk.
Okay.
From 1906. So maybe technically not steampunk,
Right.
the way it's really been defined by the people who sort of invented the steampunk subgenre. But this was part of the inspiration.
Yeah.
This is the type of technology that inspired steampunk. Likewise, you have Tom Swift, the original. These were inspirational books.
Yeah. That's amazing. What a cover. That's a beautiful cover.
Tom Swift Jr.
I'll post
Whole series of these. So these were from the 1950s. The earlier Tom Swifts were from the teens, 20s, and 30s. So you had all of these books like this that were being read by kids, going, man, this is just lighting their imaginations on fire, and going, I want to be a scientist. I want to study this stuff. I want to invent stuff. And there aren't enough books in school libraries with that focus. Most schools these days have already culled their library stacks. They've taken out a lot of those older books and discarded them. They've replaced them with newer books that really aren't science focused, that really aren't focused on stimulating that part of people's brains, young people's brains. So I was going to bring sort of a greatest hits of some of my favorites as a kid.
Yeah, these are
So
great.
So here we have The Wonderful Flight to the Mushroom Planet by Eleanor Cameron. And so this is from the 1950s. This is so fun because you have these two boys. They're like 11 years old or so. They meet a very strange astronomer who inspires them to build a spaceship in their backyard. And he helps them with some of the technology. And they build a spaceship and they travel to the Mushroom Planet, which technically isn't a planet. It's more like a moon, a very small moon that's also orbiting the Earth. It's just that it's hidden from astronomers here on Earth, that they don't really realize it's here because it's so close. They just missed it.
Okay.
Anyway, the science here is
Obviously, but the
not
imagination,
good science. The imagination is great. There's a whole series of these books, the Mushroom Planet series. So much fun for a middle grade reader. We then have, let's see, what do we do? We have the Danny Dunn series. This is the first book, Danny Dunn and the Anti-Gravity Paint.
I love that title. Yeah,
Right,
these
so
are books. When I was growing up in Poland, these titles did not exist. So these are amazing to see.
So these were written also mainly in from the 1950s to the 1970s. It's a series of like 15 or so, or maybe more. We have, again, getting still in the inventor mode, The Marvelous Inventions of Alvin Fernald by Clifford B. Hicks. So the Alvin Fernald series, this is the first book in the series, was about a basement inventor. He was I don't know, maybe 13 years old or so. He has all kinds of adventures in this series of, I don't know, 8 books or so. Most of them written in the 1970s. Maybe the first one might have been late 60s. Then we have, there's a theme here.
I love it.
This is my personal favorite of this theme.
This type.
Yeah, this type. The Mad Scientist Club. Let me get it in. Okay. So this was written in the 1960s, late 60s, and it's the first in a series of books. There are 4 books in the series. Bertrand Brinley was literally a rocket scientist. I mean, that's what he was. And this is about a club, No Girls Allowed. It's obviously from its time period. But these are a bunch of boys who are a mixture of personality types. You've got the athlete, you've got the brain, you've got the inventor, you've got it's a group, and they all bring different things to the group, but they do the most amazing sort of practical, sometimes jokes, but sometimes just practical, amazing things using science, using technology that they could assemble in their own basement, using household things. Talk about inspiring a young reader to go, boy, that's really cool. I could do that, because literally I could do it if I could convince my mom and dad to let me do it. Because, and it was one of the really fun things about this series is how relatable it was for a kid to be able to read about science and technology in a way that felt accessible, approachable, not threatening, and fun.
Yeah. Well, this looks like the type of book I would enjoy right now, just seeing that cover. Oh my goodness. Beautiful. I love
the artist is the same, actually, same artist here. Same artist did these, Charles Gear.
Right.
He illustrated a whole bunch of children's books in the 60s and 70s. He's one of my favorite illustrators. All right, now we have, moving on. Now we're getting into more science fiction type stories. Starting off with, so we have Andre Norton, who was sort of, at the time I was growing up, she was you read Andre Norton. If you read science fiction, you read Andre Norton, because she was probably at that time the most famous. I mean, along with Heinlein,
Clark.
Writing juvenile science fiction, Andre Norton made a career out of it. Dozens and dozens of these. So this was probably my favorite, The Stars Are Ours. She also had some by, this is the first book in a duology, The Moon of Three Rings, with great illustrations by Robin Jacques.
Clean, beautiful.
All right. I'm not going to use these. I'll move. I was breaking up the theme in ways that I didn't mean to. Let's see,
I
where's
feel
oh,
like
there's the other one. Okay.
you could not go wrong.
All right, then of course we have John Christopher's Tripods trilogy, starting with The White Mountains. I mean, this is, I mean, it's not technically a sequel to H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds,
Yeah.
but you really could read it as a sequel, only a sequel where the Martians win.
Hmm.
Not trying to spoil the War of the Worlds, but
Well, I've read it.
okay, okay, yeah.
It's a book that's
So,
been around for long enough. I think a couple
yeah,
of centuries removed. That if someone hasn't read it, it's okay.
right. Humanity survives and conquers with a little help from
Yeah.
nature in the War of the Worlds. In John Christopher's Tripods trilogy from the late 1960s, he imagines essentially invaders from outer space who have much the same technology as what Wells imagined in The War of the Worlds, including the aliens riding around in these big tripod-looking, mechanisms. And I absolutely devoured this trilogy when I first read it. I reread it and I reread it. I loved it, and it led me to what might be one of your favorites,
Oh yes, it is. It actually
which I read when I was about 11. It was in my elementary school
beautiful
library.
cover.
Yeah,
Rendezvous. I've
and
never seen that cover.
this is the first edition from 1973.
Stunning. Yeah, I'll just say Rendezvous with Rama was, I believe, the first sign. I know it was the sign of course. Oh
Also
my
signed.
goodness, beautiful signature. AC Clark. This was the
So
first
this
science
one,
fiction book that I read in English.
this
Rendezvous with
this
Rama.
was this was the first science fiction book for adults I ever read. And I read it when I was about 11, and I just went, wow. So this is what I've been missing out on. I
Yeah.
loved the ones written for kids, and they lit my imagination up and made me want to be a scientist. I literally spent most of my younger self, wanting to be some kind of scientist. And the type of scientist changed over the years, but I was going to be a scientist. And this was the book that really kind of opened my eyes more than any other up to that point. And I then started reading a lot more of things that were actual classic science fiction, exploring, science fiction for adults, and going back and reading extensively a lot of those older works, and loving many of them, enjoying some, and enjoy not, and then really not enjoying some as well.
A mixed bag.
So these are some of the ones that I adore. But they also led me, as I said, going back to some of the classics. They led me to Foundation,
Okay.
so
That's
by
not there.
Asimov. And another Asimov, his mystery novels, the robot novels,
Yeah.
Caves of Steel.
Beautiful cover too.
And they led me to Anne McCaffrey,
Okay.
which this looks like a fantasy novel. This
I
is
have not
actually
read
science
it.
fiction. So this is her Pern series. So this is the first novel in her Pern series. And it reads like fantasy, in terms of the tropes, the setting. I mean, everything seems very fantastical. You've got people riding dragons. That's pretty classic fantasy trope. But by the time you get about into the third book in this series, you realize that there are a lot of very sciency things going on in the story and in the world. And so it reads like fantasy, but it actually has more in common in some respects with science fiction than it does fantasy. And this was one of the gateway books for me that kind of bridged science fiction and fantasy, and
So it sounds like this is a
shaped
good.
a lot of my reading.
It sounds like this might be a good example of that sci fantasy done right, as opposed to maybe some of the books we talked about earlier.
It is good. I mean, it's a little bit dated. I mean, there are aspects of it that probably haven't aged quite as well as they could have, but for the most part, it's still very, very readable and very enjoyable. And the first 8 or 9 books in the series, there are like 25 books or so in the series. First 8 or 9 are well worth reading. I'm not a huge fan of some of the later ones. And then eventually, I'm just about at the end of my show and tell. Just about. Eventually,
Oh my goodness. Okay.
I got to Dune.
First edition. Yeah, that's a cover that everyone knows.
And signed.
Beautiful.
I,
I am jealous.
this is a treasured copy. I have to admit. I thanked my lucky stars when I ran across it decades ago. I mean, I've had it a long time, and just had to snap it up because it was, for a long time, my favorite science fiction book.
Good reason.
I absolutely adored it. When I read it, I thought, okay, I've never read science fiction quite like this.
The prose.
And while it does sort of blend a little bit of science fiction and fantasy, I mean, it's not pure science fiction. In using the definition I used earlier, I loved it.
Yeah.
But eventually, it got supplanted by.
Oh my God. I mean, I have two. They're obviously the new editions, but this is an interesting edition of Hyperion.
That's the Polish edition. That is
I love this art.
The second best cover art for Hyperion. The best one is obviously this one, in my opinion. But I do really like that Polish cover.
Yeah, all 4 books have interesting covers by I forget the name. He's got like a kind of a crazy name that he goes by, the artist. He does a lot of work with science fiction and fantasy. But that's amazing. First edition by Dan Simmons.
These are books I would not want to go out and try and buy today.
It would be very
cross your fingers and start visiting estate sales or garage sales and hope that you find somebody who just happened to have one of these stuck up in a closet or an attic somewhere, and that it's still in decent condition. And those copies like that still do show up. I still occasionally run across things that, like, how on earth did I find this at this ridiculously low price? And I mean, I don't do a lot of collecting anymore. I mean, I'm running out of space to shelve books, so I have scaled back a lot of my collecting. But every now and then, I still run across something that, like, okay.
But thank you so much. Thank you for showing these books, and I love how you ramped up, starting with the theme of books that shaped you as a reader in many ways, and still have a place in your heart, and all the way to these books that are, for so many readers now, staples of favorite books of all time. Dune, Hyperion, beautiful, beautiful covers. I do like this rapid fire just to get an idea of where you are as a reader by asking rapid fire questions. And the first question in that rapid fire sequence is Dune or Hyperion? You've already...
And I answer, the answer is both, but it depends on the time period. It used to be Dune, now it's Hyperion.
Yeah, I always have a dream of running into Dan Simmons. I don't know, he's old. I don't know if he gets around much, but he actually lives nearby. He lives in Longmont, in Colorado, not too far from where I am. So yeah, I always hope that I will see him on a walk and just say hello to him and thank him for what he's done with these books. And not only because he's such, and I think you mentioned it in one of your videos, because you have the best video on Dan Simmons, and I'll link that one, of course, if anyone is a fan and hasn't seen your video. Your breakdown of all the books is fantastic. The way you rank them, the way you shelve them, in a sense, fabulous video. I read early this year, I read The Terror for the first time, and I loved that story. It was incredible. I thought it's definitely like top 3 of my favorite books that I've read this year, maybe number 1. I don't know. I loved it. So Dan Simmons, fantastic. But this rapid fire, when you're reading, and I think you may have answered this also in a way. Do you prefer hard SF, like idea driven now, or soft, like more character? Um, is there a delineation between the two in your mind, or you prefer one to the other?
Yes and no. I actually prefer it when they do both at the same time.
Yes.
I mean, for me, that is the sweet spot,
Yeah.
is if you can do the hard elements, and it doesn't have to be diamond hard. It just
Right.
needs to have,
Ethereum hard.
some substance to it that's plausible, that's well thought out, that's not just pie in the sky. Let me imagine a technology. I don't know how the technology could ever possibly work, but hey, somebody might invent it at some point. Like, that I'm not so fond of. But reasonably hard science fiction, but with good characters, with well thought out settings and world building. That for me, that's perfect. Hyperion is
Yeah. Perfect
like,
example of it.
it's a perfect example of that. I mean, it does both of those things so very, very, very well. And what I really don't like is when they do it badly. So, so if I look at it in terms of risk minimization as opposed to enjoyment maximization,
Hmm.
from a risk minimization standpoint, I absolutely prefer hard
Hmm.
science fiction because there's far less bad hard science fiction. That may not necessarily be good or great. I mean, a lot of the early stuff, for example, has some really interesting scientific ideas that are explored, but the rest of the story is really very mediocre. But I'm still going to enjoy that story because it has a really interesting idea and it's really short. So I don't have to be tortured by the fact that
I love
the
that.
rest of the world building and the character development are so stunted. It's like, okay, great. It's short.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Whereas with a lot of the softer science fiction, and I saw this a lot in a lot of new wave science fiction in the 1960s and 70s, there was this obsession with being transgressive. I mean, we've got to violate all the taboos. We've got to, get as much attention as possible. So, I mean, there's this sort of attention-seeking behavior on the part of authors that we just want to shock readers, expose them to things that they've never been exposed to. But the thing is many of those authors kind of forgot about telling good stories. They let the transgressive aspects of their stories take precedence over the some of the ideas that they wanted to get across, or the character development that they ostensibly were doing, except they really weren't doing because the
Right.
characters they were creating weren't realistic, or they were so extreme that maybe it's possible somebody could be like this, but they're not relatable. They're not relatable at all because of how extreme some of their
Interesting.
behaviors are. And
Are
so
you are you in any way calling out like Philip K. Dick? Any in this? Because that's what I'm
let
thinking
me
as
let me
you're.
let me put it this way. I have a lot of respect for Dick's output, and the influence he's had on the genre. I mean, tremendous influence. I think he was at his best in his short fiction.
Interesting. Okay.
I think he absolutely was at his best in his short fiction because there he was focused on ideas, and he
Minority
could
Report.
he could address the idea, develop it to the point that it needed to be developed, and then he could walk away. And you didn't have to worry about all this other stuff that is nonsensical. There are so many non sequiturs in his novels that for me it's a little frustrating. Granted, I
Interesting.
can appreciate some of what he's doing in those novels, but in other cases I'm going, okay, this is a drug trip. I mean, he was hallucinating while writing this, and he just sort of wrote down his hallucinations and got it published. I don't enjoy that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't need a character encountering a walking, talking beetle along the side of the road in a novel that's supposed to be a realistic post-apocalyptic novel. It's like that doesn't fit.
Yeah. So I'll
That
say,
was in Dr. Blood Money. So
yeah, yep. I'll say, I I love Philip K. Dick's writing, but I can't read him back to back. I can take that weirdness and the unexpected twists and the spirals in in short bursts. So I'll read maybe one book, two books per year. Uh, but yeah, I loved Ubik. I loved the weird stuff. Him talking to a door in the beginning. I was laughing out loud. There's so much in his writing that is just find original, like stuff that I have not read from anyone else previously. When I discovered PKD, that's why I liked. I've read, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 books, not that many, but to lesser or higher degree, I liked all of them. I think Maze of Death I enjoyed recently.
yeah, I have. I mean, I've read Ubik, and I did enjoy Ubik. I'm not, I didn't dislike it. It's just I didn't feel connected to that story because Dick kept yanking me out of it as I
Mhm.
was reading it,
That's a
even though
fair
there were
point.
elements of it I quite enjoyed. And I think there are elements of Man in the High Castle I really
Mhm.
like, and yet at the same time, he just keeps yanking me out of the story the way he's telling the story. And
Yeah,
so I have, as I said, I've derived far more enjoyment from reading his short fiction than I have from reading his novels.
yeah, that makes sense. What about the world we live in right now is obviously being changed by artificial intelligence. I have two daughters. One is in college, one is a junior in high school. They're both using AI as they're studying. I'm trying to control what to make sure that they're actually studying, not supplanting their thoughts with something that ChatGPT spews. But the world is changing for sure. We're on social media. I heard you talk about social media a bit, some of the negative things, but also trying to wrap your head around and be a positive. And I think you do that. You bring that positive, make positive impact through the way we can connect so easily. So there are definitely positive aspects, but there are also many things just maybe lurking around the corner that can be scary. But just generally speaking, with older books, when you were reading books, did you always resonate more with reading about aliens as far as their consciousness, or exploring AI derived consciousness, or maybe like cyberpunk with humans uploaded into digital space? Which side is you're leaning closer to?
It's a false choice.
Tell me why.
And here's why. A true AI is indistinguishable from an alien.
Hmm.
I mean,
Okay,
if a
I don't
true
think about that.
singularity
Yeah,
occurs, we will have no comprehension. We will not be able to understand that intelligence. It
yeah,
will be an alien intelligence and it will go in directions that we cannot predict because that's kind of the point, or that's the idea behind the idea of a cognitive singularity.
yeah. But it is the
So
singularity that's built upon the large language models that we have, and that's the learning from everything that it knows about humans and our discoveries and our
right.
history, right? Culture. That's the base of that. And when it takes off and is learning super, then obviously
Yeah,
you're right. But it is
maybe.
still,
Well, again, we're getting it's sort of a definitional issue.
yeah,
According to the experts, and I'm not an expert, but from what I've read, the experts say large language models technically are not ever going to be artificial intelligence. That's just a label that's been put on it. But for the very reason that because they are copying existing data, I mean, they're simply just, it's pattern recognition.
Mhm.
It's modeling based on patterns as opposed to truly engaging with the world and learning from the world, learning from experience in ways that are more organic, maybe a way of putting it. That's a big difference between general artificial intelligence and large language models. And so when I talk about AI, I'm really talking general artificial
Right.
intelligence
Which some
that
people say
does
is
break
coming.
that singularity barrier.
Yeah,
Yeah,
some people
maybe
say
it
it's already
comes, maybe
coming.
it's not.
Yeah.
Large language models are going to be very powerful, no question. They already are. But I don't, I, I generally like stories that offer at least some hope to them. You know, that there's, you know, and I just finished doing several months deep dive into apocalyptic fiction. And believe me, there's not a lot of hope in many of those stories, although there are many that are hopeful. So again, they are not all very cynical or very depressing. Some are, many are. But both types of stories, aliens and AI, tend to be written in a negative way. They're a threat. You know, aliens are a threat. AI is a threat. And it's very conceivable that they really will be, that it's, you know, in fact, very possible that they are more likely to be threats than they are to be, you know, beneficial or benign towards humanity. But what I really want to read these days, I don't want to be reading more alien invasions, you know, hostile alien invasions. I don't want to read more AI apocalypse that's going to, you know, target humanity for destruction or enslavement or whatever. What I want to read are books that talk about the hopeful opportunities, the potential that AI offers. You know,
Mhm.
can AI actually help humanity? I mean, that's been a central role of science fiction from the very beginning, is imagining possible positive outcomes. Yes, there have been, you know, science fiction stories about catastrophes and, you know, technology gone awry and, you know, bad things happening. But a lot of stories were about, hey, this is how technology, this is how science makes the world better. This is how it uncorks human potential in ways that we
That's a
really
great
haven't seen
phrase.
before.
I love that phrase, uncorks human potential.
And I haven't seen that very much either in the alien space or the AI space. And so, I mean, there are some. Which one is that? Is that
Well,
Algebraist?
it's the algebraist. Yeah, it's obviously not a culture novel, but I wanted to point to the author because I think his vision in the culture books is one that appeals to me of coexistence with
Right.
minds, artificial intelligence, and creating a world where humans can really be free to explore this post-scarcity world. And there's some problems there, of course. Human
Right.
nature creeps in, but I love that series.
Exactly. And I love the culture novels for some of those same reasons. And there aren't enough of those types of novels, in my opinion. I'd
Mhm.
like to see more. So that way, it provides more of a counter argument or a counterweight to a lot of the fear based storytelling that consumes alien novels and AI novels. And we have reason to be afraid of both. I'm not minimizing the potential risks associated with alien contact. that, you know, that could be a really bad thing. But if we imagine the possibility of it being a good thing, then maybe we'll be better prepared for it. Same with AI. If we can imagine it being a good thing, can we imagine the path to make it a good thing?
Yeah. I think you said something in one of your videos that I watched because you have three, I think three videos maybe that talk about dystopian, future, apocalyptic, science fiction, existential angst, I think. And in one of those videos, I think you mentioned the fact that some of the breakdowns in society, for example, that we see in some of these post apocalyptic books, the way the authors are writing, as soon as things go bad, people turn on each other. And you almost suggested that perhaps this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we keep writing this and people keep reading this, and if something should happen, and of course we live in tenuous times, who knows? There are so many factors at play. Uh, I thought that was a fascinating way of looking at it, where we need a little bit more positivity, maybe even as an educational tool to show people a better way, neighbors helping each other as opposed to right away turning to guns and protecting their own, but at the expense of everybody else. I thought that was such an amazing statement you made in that video. I really appreciated it.
Well, I loved making that video. That's one of my favorite videos that I've ever made.
Oh, good.
I had so much fun just sort of thinking through the different philosophical approaches to apocalyptic fiction that various authors have taken. And some are very hopeful, very positive in their approaches. Some are very, very negative, very cynical, very, you know, law of the jungle type of approach. If things go bad, well, look out for yourself and don't care about anybody else, and shoot first, ask questions later. All of that, I see that in the media today. You see it in how stories get covered by the press. That there's this framing that often reinforces that idea that ultimately is rooted in fear.
Yeah.
And so if you can acknowledge the potential that yes, there it is good to be cautious. It is good to be a little bit fearful in recognizing that there are risks and take appropriate precautions to manage those risks. But don't let the fear completely consume your decision making, consume your values, consume your moral judgment and how to, in terms of how you want to survive, because you might survive, but will you be truly human at that point, or will you be more of an animal if you don't have some better angels guiding you? And that was one of the nice things about the different approaches that different philosophers took is you could see over time, because I kind of walked through historically, you had Thomas Hobbes at the beginning, and well, yeah, he was sort of a law of the jungle kind of guy, but that led to other philosophers who had maybe a little more enlightened way of thinking about things, all the way up till you get to Jean-Paul Sartre, who's like, whatever, do what makes you feel good, and if it makes you feel good to help other people, great, go for it. So it's like, okay. and there are apocalyptic novels that are written from that perspective.
Yeah.
So I loved thinking about how all of these different stories, in a sense, are in conversation with one another, but are also competing with one another because they're competing to resonate with readers' minds, to burrow in and go, okay, yeah, this is how you need to be thinking about this. Because that's what science fiction authors have been doing for a long time. They've been basically trying to tell the readers, you need to be thinking about this, and you probably want to be thinking about it this way because this is the logical way to think about it, or this is the rational way, or the scientific way, or whatever way they want to approach it. Heinlein might have said, this is the way a nudist would think about it, because, hey, anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry to go off on that tangent.
No, that's okay. That's okay. This is why we're talking kind of loosely. We have some framework, but it's awesome when we can go off on a tangent. And it just something you said reminded me of the post-apocalyptic dystopian video that you made. That really a triptych of videos that I kind of watched back to back some time ago. They're all great, and yeah, I'll link everything. You have so many great videos, and they're edited beautifully. That video specifically, the editing also was fabulous. So it's just so much fun to watch. One more question. I wonder how you're gonna think about this one. You mentioned history. You love science fiction with some historical perspective. If you could go back in time machine, one-time use, would you be your curiosity? Would it take you into the future, 200 years, just to see what have we done with this planet? Or would you rather, is there a time period in the past, maybe the Roman times, the pyramids being built, that is so fascinating to you? Because I love good time travel story. So I always ask this question. I wonder what your answer might be.
My answer probably has more in common with the approach that one of your neighbors has taken. So, another famous science fiction author, Connie Willis, also lives in Colorado.
Doomsday Book. Yeah.
Other, yeah. And she's backward looking.
Okay. Yeah.
Her time travel goes to the past. They're academics. They're studying the past. They're learning from the past. They're trying to they're visiting moments in history that were pivotal, that today we want to understand better, because history informs our decision making. If we don't understand our history, we're probably going to end up making bad decisions because we're not going to have the best information to help guide us. And so I like that approach that she's taken with her time travel novels. She has a series of them, and
Yes.
they're wonderful. I highly recommend them. For me, the appeal of going backward in time is to see moments of creation. And I'm not talking going all the way back 16 billion years ago. I don't need to see the Big Bang. I don't need to see, what other, the creation of life on Earth, some tiny microscopic organic molecule clump. I don't need to see that. What I'm interested in is humanity creating things. The spark, the inspiration, the actual creation of something, but it's more the moment that is an aha moment. The inspiration strikes. They've connected the dots. They've seen the pattern and how things fit together, and they see a way forward, or they see a way to solve a problem, or they see a way to harness some resource or energy or creativity of others. Or, it could be defined in many, many, many different ways. So with that idea of moments of creation, there are, there's one moment of creation that's very personal. I would absolutely love to go back and visit my own self on the day of my first child's birth, and the first time I got to hold my daughter in my arms. For me, I love that memory, and I would love to experience it again. On a less personal note, I would love to go back to the age of discovery, the period of time covered by Neil Stephenson's Baroque cycle, where they were inventing science. I mean, literally inventing the scientific method then, and being in the room with them, like at the Royal Society of London, where you had Newton and Hobbes and Leibniz and all of these other and Hooke and Edmund Halley and the greatest minds of the era, who were individually and collectively creating the discipline of science. I would have loved to have been in the room for some of those discussions. I mean, I think that would be fascinating to experience something like that and see how it works, and maybe learn from it and see if there are ways to bring that experience back and put it to good use here. If you haven't read Neil Stephenson's Baroque cycle, I highly recommend it.
I have not. I have not.
It is the perfect blend of science fiction and historical fiction, because it disproves the whole idea that science fiction is all about the future. Because this is the history of science. It's historical fiction, but it is all about science.
That's very interesting. I love your answer. I think I think you are the first person who said he would like to go back into the past. But I love your answers, your answer and your well answers because you had kind of took the personal side, which really I thought was beautiful, very touching to see your daughter and made me think of my kids when they were born. So that's such a beautiful answer. I really appreciated that. I really enjoyed hearing you say that. Yeah, that's a very thoughtful and unusual, perhaps, based on my sample of 8 people that I've asked this in my Why Sci-Fi. But a fantastic answer. I really thank you for sharing that, especially the personal side with your daughter and how much it meant to you, and being able to see that again. Yeah, that would be to me also so priceless and precious that I haven't thought about going back to see myself, but that would be the same moment for me, my kids being born. That's amazing. And you're such a thoughtful and kind of measured in your statements person that I think this next question you're the perfect person to ask. A lot of I talk in the comment section, and I have some friends who struggle reading older science fiction because of some of the problematic ideas that are in it. There are many different things that we could talk about, but the treatment of women, oftentimes the neglect in some authors' minds. It seems like women are really second class citizens. They don't even exist in some books. And some of my favorite authors, like Stanisław Lem, for example, is guilty of it too. He doesn't discriminate against women. They're just non-existent. There isn't a single one in some of his books on space exploration. But I know you have some thoughts on this. I would love for you and some of the younger even viewers maybe watching to kind of hear why it's still uh, well worth the read to pick up some of these books despite some of those outdated ideas. If you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there are a lot of problems with older science fiction. That does not mean that they are not still relevant and readable today, although there are plenty of older works that I would say don't really need to be read anymore. They probably weren't all that good to begin with. They weren't all that original to begin with. You could essentially get the same ideas being explored in better works from that time period. So I, I'm just thinking, one of the books that I read for this apocalyptic fiction series, actually several of them, were very outdated in their ideas about gender roles, and coming at it from opposite ends of the sort of spectrum, because
Okay.
there are some older ones. Ward Moore's Greener Than You Think, for example, it's a 1940s era satire that is, technology run amok. This really super duper fertilizer that's intended for agricultural crops gets misused and put on lawn grass, and it causes the lawn grass to mutate and essentially take over the world. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. It becomes just this all-consuming monster. It's just grass spreading and unstoppable. The military's called out. I mean, anyway, the unwitting cause of it was a fertilizer salesman who, wanting to make more money as a salesman, more commission, says, well, I don't need to sell it just to farmers. I can sell it to homeowners who want their lawns looking good.
Mhm.
And his whole personality is like this one big ball of obnoxiousness. Pretty much every close-minded, exploitative, type of personality trait that you could imagine. Dishonest. He's not a good guy. Granted, this is a satire, so, and it's very clearly a satire the way Ward Moore wrote it. So it's easier to suspend disbelief. at the same time, it's really annoying,
Yeah.
this character and other characters who are, you know, every female character that they encounter is essentially a automaton to be ordered around or a potential sex object. That's what they are. They don't really have brains. They don't really have any kind of agency. Generally speaking, I may actually be missing. I think now that I think about it, it's been several months since I read the book. I read that early this year. There might actually have been one character who was more of the domineering type, which of course is another stereotype that is not a very positive one for
Yeah.
women. But hey, she has strength,
Right.
but she's not a good character. There are so many examples of, women secretaries. And of course, almost every secretary is hit on by their bosses. But again, this is the kind of thing where you want to put yourself not in the reader of today, where we have laws against things like this and, the potential for lawsuits. Readers back in, say, the 1940s and 1950s, this was common practice. And from both sides of the experience, there were many women, and again, I'm not excusing this practice at all, but there were many women who fully expected that if they got hired as a secretary, that there was the potential that they might be able to marry their boss. And that was a good move from their perspective. Again, I don't want to generalize on that at all. But culturally, it was far more accepted for that type of interaction and that type of objectification, for example, from the men looking at the women, not really seeing them as a fully fledged human being who is just as capable, just as smart, just as rational. Another one of the things that comes up a lot of times in older science fiction is, the women are emotional. Their emotions run everything, whereas the men, the scientists, they are rational. They are not ruled by their emotions. Of course, that's bogus on both sides. Women can be perfectly rational. Men can be ridiculously emotional, especially if it's emotion like anger. And there's an awful lot of anger that tends to motivate some decision making in lots of science fiction. It's like, how is this any different from accusing a female character of being overly emotional in their decision making?
But do you feel science fiction is more guilty than other genres? Science fiction of that time, of those stereotypes. I haven't read as much fantasy, for example, especially older fantasy. Is fantasy somehow immune to these issues creeping up? Was there a
No.
problem with science fiction specifically?
Well, I mean, part of the problem is fantasy as we think of fantasy today was not really well developed at the same time that these science fiction stories were
Yeah.
being written.
Yeah.
Excuse me. There were and there were quite a few authors writing fantasy who were actually women. So their perspective didn't quite balance out the male perspective for the male authors of fantasy, but I don't think it was quite as extreme in the fantasy genre.
Because
Now, if you look at other genres, if you look at, for example, like the mystery genre,
sure.
again, it depends on who the author was. If you had a female author, like Dorothy Sayers, wrote male and female characters very, very well. But there were a lot of male mystery writers who didn't write female characters very well. They were objects. They were pawns to be shuffled around a lot of the times, or they were stereotypes. Again, I don't want to generalize across the board, but it was fairly common to see women depicted in ways that were very stereotypical, realistic. There really were people who thought that way, behaved that way, women who were that way. But you could easily, if you're reading it today without that cultural knowledge of what the culture was like back in the 1950s, that it really wasn't quite as rosy and wonderful as it often is made out to be, that there were a lot of behaviors that were problematic, but they were also more widely accepted. Even if they weren't necessarily liked, they weren't subject to the same kind of stigma that they are today. And it makes it sometimes harder to read those older works. So you sort of have to just shut down the the red flag engine in your brain when you're reading a lot of those older works, because you read some of these things, you're like, oh, that could never happen today, or that would never be tolerated today, or that that's highly illegal, highly unethical, highly whatever it is. It's like, yeah, but quite frankly, the standards were different back then. Doesn't necessarily mean they're better. They were better back then. It just means they were different. And there are still a lot of very good ideas, still a lot of very good, thought-provoking discussions of themes and issues and problems that make reading older works very worthwhile.
That's a great answer.
But
I always say I agree with everything you're saying, but there is one thing that I always think about when I think about this issue when I'm reading a book. Like I read Gateway recently, and a woman, an object of the main character's attention. At one point, he basically beats her up physically, punches her several times, knocks her out, and then she comes back to him as if nothing happened. And I still love the book. There were a lot of great things about the read, but I was thinking about this issue specifically because of Gateway. Problem is, when I think of science fiction authors, I would almost expect more from them, because if they're thinking about this future, like Gateway future scenario, the fact that they were unable to foresee women like gaining, as this was happening in their time already, women were definitely becoming more and more freedom, and contraception was like, these things were in the news. That the fact that they still were unable to foresee a future in which men and women are equal is disappointing, maybe, to me, even though I still think these books are so well worth reading for all the reasons that you said.
yeah, that's a very, very good point about not imagining
Yeah,
cultural changes that
exactly.
should have been relatively obvious, particularly getting into the 1970s when Gateway was written. Some of it is, I mean, Gateway, Pohl was older, so he was from an older generation, so he might have been a little set in his ways at that point. There are some other factors that are also interesting that may feed into this. One is historical reader profile of science fiction, overwhelmingly male.
True.
So the authors are writing for their audience.
That's a good point.
Their
Yeah.
audience is, 90 something percent male, and typically younger, leaning younger, historically. And their publishers are giving them instructions, especially if you go farther back in time in the science fiction era. Authors didn't really have complete control over what they were writing. They were subject to a lot of editorial control from their publishers, who would basically say, hey, I want a story that does this, or I want a story that contains certain types of elements, and you have to limit it to X number of words. So squeeze as much as you can into this limit, because you can't go over this limit, because otherwise we can't publish the book, because the price of the book is 35 cents. And so we have to make a profit on the book.
Right.
So there were so many constraints that the authors were subjected to.
Interesting.
And Pohl was an editor more than an author. He professionally, he was an editor and agent for other authors, which is where he really made most of his his livelihood, and on the side wrote a lot of science fiction. Another thing is, a lot of those early science fiction authors were writing more than just science fiction. A surprising number of them wrote crime fiction. Right in the heyday of the sort of noir crime, very violent, very edgy, very abusive towards women. Women got treated very, very badly during the noir crime era. And so some of these authors are writing crime fiction that's tough and gritty, and then they're also writing science fiction. And there is some overlap between those audiences. And in some respects, stylistically, they might have some difficulty separating those styles, moving from one to the other, because they were writing for the pulp magazines. They were writing to put food on their plates, at a penny a word or whatever the going rate was at the time. So they were just churning stuff out. And the more sensational it was, meaning the more violent and bloody and abusive it was, the better, because that kind of stuff made for good press for the pulp magazines, and allowed them to paint these really lurid cover art for the magazines that would sell more magazines.
So there were pressures.
Putting all of that in context, there were a lot of pressures for them to write a certain way. And how much of that was by choice and how much of that was kind of forced on them, how much of that they were experimenting maybe to an extent, saying, hey, let me see if I can push a boundary here. Let me see if, this sort of that transgressive element that I was talking about earlier, some of that shows up in a lot of science fiction stories from that era.
That's a great exhaustive answer for sure. Yeah. Did you want to add something to that? I'm sorry, I jumped in.
I probably will at some point. I don't.
Well,
good luck shutting me up.
Let's go a little lighter. Let's go a little bit lighter as we're slowly winding down. Tell me, Bridger, is there one book that if you got stranded on a deserted island and you don't know when you're gonna get picked up, and you might have to read it over and over again, is there one book that you could see yourself going back to again and again?
Yes. But you have to understand, I'm a pragmatist.
Okay.
I'd bring a survival manual with me.
Ooh, that's like if I had a mic.
Yeah. I want to know how to live, how to survive. I want to make sure that if I need to make my own tools, how do I make those tools? If I need to know how to trap, wild animals so that I can have something to eat, or know which plants are poisonous and which ones aren't, or how to build an effective fire, or how to build a shelter using whatever limited resources are available to me. I want a how-to manual. That's sort of been my life story to an extent. I'm a do-it-yourselfer. I like teaching myself how to do things, learning new skills, and trying to see, can I actually do whatever it is that I'm teaching myself. So having something like that on hand would be an absolute essential.
Yeah,
and that may sound like a cop-out.
No, not at all.
That would be.
I love it. And I'm always surprised because I've gotten some great answers from quite a few folks I spoke to, including yours, which is pragmatic for sure. But it's like, duh, of course, this is the answer, in fact. But I had an author on one of the previous episodes, and she said she would bring a book full of empty pages so she could write her own story, which I also
that's the follow-on to mine, because my rationale is I can write my own fiction. I have an imagination, and I've read enough over the years that I have lots of sources that I can draw upon for inspiration. So if I have a manual that tells me how to create a writing instrument and how to create paper out of tree bark, I can, what plants are going to give me the best ink, even or
Unlimited.
maybe if I just have to use my own blood to write in, whatever it is, I don't need a book to tell me a story. I can, especially if I'm going to be there all by myself, I'm going to need something to entertain me. So creating stories, living in my own imagination, hopefully while retaining my sanity, would be the approach that I would take.
I love it.
I don't need a book to do that.
I love it. Great answer. Fabulous. I really enjoyed that. That's awesome. I have a question for you that I wanted to ask you. Uh, I heard a quote, and I have the quote. I don't know who said it. So, unread books. So this is about collecting books, and the quote is: "Unread books are just as important as the ones we read, as they show the limits of our knowledge and the extent of our ignorance to ourselves." So the quote is that the books, unread books, kind of tell a lot about the person. So if you have a bigger collection, don't worry about it, that you're never going to get to all those books. Umberto Eco famously had like 30,000 books. He didn't read it, but clearly he was a genius. Name of the Rose is one of my favorite books. So I mentioned Umberto Eco. But what do you think about that? Is there something to it that it is okay to have some books, even if you won't read them, because they kind of, push that boundary of knowledge and extend it, even when they're showing us where it lies?
I agree and disagree. I mean, I won't say I disagree, but I think there are different ways of thinking about it.
Yeah.
I do like that quote. I like the idea that as long as the person who's acquiring the books recognizes what's in the books, even if they haven't read them, but they recognize that they do contain certain types of information, certain types of knowledge or experiences, or that there are things in those books that can push them beyond where they currently are, and not just in a very general sense that they actually know what a book is about. Again, they haven't read it, they don't know the details, but they understand how that book potentially can extend their boundaries, their limits, if they were to read them. That's great. I mean, I'm a preservationist at heart. So, and I know with 10,000 plus books, I'm highly unlikely at my age to read all of them. I'm trying, and I've made pretty good progress, but
Doing well.
I know that I probably am not going to get through all of them. But I want them to be available for future readers, for future generations. If not my kids, maybe someone else will find value in them and use them to expand their own minds, their own experiences. Too many books are lost to trash heaps. In our digital era, at some point, nearly all media is going to go digital, which is going to create enormous risks of loss at some point if the technology either changes or is lost due to a catastrophic failure. Where is that repository of knowledge going to be? It'll be in, hopefully, libraries that still retain some physical hard copies of books. So, yeah, there's an element of kind of doomsday prepper aspect of my library because I'm saving it for a rainy day at some point in the future that these things will still be here. But as you said, and in the quote, it's also, I have been very selective in choosing to include books that I know that I would want to read, or that I know that I would benefit from reading, or that would add to my knowledge or to other people's knowledge of the world, which I think fits that quote.
Yeah.
very well.
Big time.
I'm not so positively disposed to people who just acquire books for the sake of having lots of books. Like, I'm not a fan of book haul videos or other things on my channel. I mean, I don't do any of that kind of thing. And it frustrates me that so many booktube channels spend far more time talking about books that they haven't read than books that they
Great
have
point.
read. And that seems kind of pointless to me to a large extent. I if it's more of a lifestyle saying, hey, I want lots of really cool books on my bookshelf so that people will think I'm cool because I have good taste that just happens to align with theirs,
Yeah.
that
That seems
is
a bit
maybe not
shallow.
the best reason to be going out and buying hundreds, if not thousands, of books. Now, on the other hand, if you're buying them to preserve them, great. You're buying them because you actually really want to read them and benefit from them, or make them available to other people to read and benefit from it. That's also great. But
So the intent is
the
important.
intent is important, and some of it is sort of financial recklessness.
Yeah.
I mean, I,
Books
I
can be expensive.
I see a lot of booktube channels, and I'm going, do you have any idea how much money you're spending
Yeah.
on all of these books? Now, some of them maybe getting them from publishers, and they're getting free stuff, but a lot of it, I just go, this is not a good use of money, which is sort of where I mean, that the video you talked about before, my book collecting video, I don't buy a lot of new books, not at all. It's very rare for me to buy a new book. Almost everything I buy is used.
Mhm.
I mean, it's
That's
better
right.
for the
I
planet.
think you even
It may not
mentioned
necessarily, yeah, it's not
something.
necessarily better for the author. I do understand the authors do want to get paid, but if you're going to be acquiring a lot of books, it's really not smart to buy new at
Yeah.
all.
Well,
Really
two
not
reasons.
smart.
Two reasons. In one of your videos, I remember you saying something that I also thought about as something that, oh, okay, a different way of looking at things, not just from the standpoint of the financial output of obviously a new book costs, let's say, $29 for a hardcover, and then you could pick it up a few years later for a fraction of that. But also, I think this was you. I think you said that you also want. There's a lot of hype around these newer books when they're published. You want a little bit of distance from that to see if that book is really worthwhile, because we do have limited time on this planet to enjoy books, and you want to make sure that you pick up a book that is worth reading also. And I thought that was two reasons to kind of wait maybe a couple of years before picking up a book that I haven't thought about before. So I appreciate that as well.
But yes, the idea, I read very little new releases, very few new releases. I wait a few years. So there's a lag between when a new book gets released and when I will actually read it. I mean, it's very rare. For certain authors, I'll read a new release. For example, Guy Gavriel Kay's latest novel that just came out in May, I read it in June, I think, or maybe July, something like that. So yes, but I know what I'm getting with Kay, and I felt comfortable. There's no risk associated with buying a book from this particular author. But so many new releases are hyped. I mean, it's a lot of marketing hype, and a lot of that hype is really not warranted by the actual quality or enjoyment I might get from a book.
Yeah.
And so much of BookTube or Book Talk, or I mean the online space is consumed with what's the newest rage, what's the newest most popular author or book release that everybody wants to be a part of. This fear of missing out.
Yeah.
And my channel is the exact opposite of that. I don't talk about anything that's popular. I'm basically picking all the things that nobody's talking about, but people should be talking about. And I hope that people, are
and
tuning
I
in
think
and
that's
listening.
that's the big reason why your channel is so popular. Are you hearing me okay now?
Now you're good. You're good.
Okay.
So
So
whatever the disruption was, it seems to be very temporary.
hopefully, but as we're wrapping up almost 2 hours in,
Yeah.
speaking of your channel, I wanted to ask you because you put out a video recently, and another one even more recent, where you did something very interesting. But tell me, you do have plans for your channel, for the viewers who have watched your videos. It's been, I don't know, 3 years on YouTube, 4 years almost. I think
Actually,
you
I just crossed the 4 year mark.
4 years. So you do have some changes. So that's exciting. Can you tell us about what's upcoming on the library ladder?
Well, sure. I mean, in some respects, it's not a change from my perspective because this is
Mhm.
sort of what I had been planning to do all along. I mentioned before, I started out planning to talk primarily about children's books and to talk about other genres too, like fantasy and science fiction and mystery and crime and historical fiction and literary fiction and nonfiction. I mean, I have bookcases full of antiquarian nonfiction books that I love talking about, and I intended to do so. And in the first few months after launching my channel, I tried to sprinkle in a variety of different genres. I started off heavily on children's books. The first few videos were primarily about children's books. And I made a couple about fantasy books and then did a little science fiction and did one on Perry Mason crime fiction. I mean, I was just kind of sprinkling different types of genres to see, or to try to train the algorithm to
Mhm.
recognize that, hey, I read lots of different books, different genres, and I'm interested in talking about all of them. The algorithm was having nothing to do with my plans, what I wanted to do. The algorithm said, oh, you're a fantasy channel.
Oh,
I mean,
interesting.
that's literally what the algorithm did. It looked at which videos of mine got the most audience engagement. By far, it was the fantasy themed, ones about fantasy fiction.
Mhm.
Science fiction was a runner-up, somewhat distant runner-up, but it had a significant, there's some overlap between the science fiction and fantasy reader bases.
Mhm.
And so children's books got no traction on the algorithm at all. My Perry Mason, the crime fiction, which was all about how the Perry Mason we know and love from TV is nothing like the original Perry Mason from the pulp magazines that Earl Stanley Gardner wrote way back in the 1920s and 30s. I mean, that was my worst performing video still is, I think, just about my worst performing video. Because the algorithm said, this is not anything that your audience wants to watch. But the algorithm was making the decision for me about who my audience should be. I actually stepped away from all of those genres and focused primarily on fantasy and science fiction for the next 2 years. I said, fine, let me grow the channel in a direction that clearly the algorithm is trying to push me toward. And I like talking about these genres. I mean, I enjoy them. They're two of my favorite genres, fantasy and science fiction. But my plan all along has been to go back to all of these other genres that I also really enjoy reading and hope to be able to introduce books and authors that aren't part of the popular conversation today, to introduce them to more viewers and maybe get them interested in trying some of their works in these other
Yeah.
genres. And once I got enough, I hoped, critical mass of an audience, I could make that transition. I could say, hey, let me make a video about historical fiction, which I will be making a series of videos about historical fiction very soon. Right now, I'm in the process of making a couple of videos about horror fiction.
Very timely.
I'm literally in the middle of editing it. I was hoping to have it up today. It's not going to be up today. It's probably not going to be up tomorrow, but I think it'll be up in a couple of days, which might actually be before you actually get this video uploaded on your channel. Anyway, there is a horror themed video coming very soon, a couple of them. And then I want to also talk about a lot of smaller topics. Most of the stuff that I do on my channel tend to be bigger things, where I'm looking at broad cross sections or a deep dive into a particular author, doing a full retrospective of their entire output, or connecting dots from 200 years ago to today. Those are big projects, and I spend years working on them. I mean, the apocalyptic fiction one that I just finished literally was 10 years in the making. That's not something that I just sort of said, hey, for next month, I think I'm going to make a video about, 200 years of apocalyptic fiction history. Like, no, that was 10 years worth of work. A lot of it concentrated in the last 2 years, because there were a lot of books that I kept stumbling across going, oh, I forgot about this one. I need to read this one too. And so I was kind of filling gaps in my reading over the last couple of years. But I literally read 250 apocalyptic fiction novels over the last 10 years. Well, maybe not that many, because some of them date back farther. So in the last 30 years, 250, but a lot of them in the last 10 years. That informed that project. So the historical fiction project that I'm working on is going to be similar in scope, and it's also been years in development. I've been piecing together my thoughts on it, reading various works from different authors, trying to make sure that I'm presenting a really well-rounded presentation. But these are big projects. They take lots of time, a lot of effort. I don't have a whole lot of time to devote to my channel outside of those projects. And at the same time, there are a lot of really small topics that it's like, boy, I'd really love to spend a few minutes just talking about this, but I don't really have time to focus on that. So my channel, I don't do those things on my channel. And quite frankly, when I have done a little bit of experimentation like that, the algorithm hates it. So I realized that maybe it's not worth putting in the effort on some of those little smaller topics if they're just going to be ignored on that platform. So I have launched a Substack where I'm going to be focusing on more of those smaller topics and maybe aspects, more deeper dive topics, where a lot of my videos on my YouTube channel are more higher level overviews. I do dive deep in some respects, but I'm not really doing deep dives on particular topics, because that's not my intent. My whole goal for my channel is to introduce things to people, get them interested, and hopefully prompt them, encourage them, incentivize them, inspire them to seek out more information, to seek out more of those books. But by putting it on their radar, I think I've hopefully done a good service, and maybe started a conversation that other YouTube channels, other influencers, other people will pick up on and continue. I'm more interested in starting conversations than really diving deep into them on my channel, because those are two different audiences. The deep dive ones, those are the people who are already fans. Those are the people who already know about the authors. They already know about the books. And those are not the people I'm trying to target.
Okay, that's
by
very
and large.
interesting. That's very interesting.
So with Substack, I'm going to be doing more very specific topics. Some are smaller topics. Some are going to be more in-depth topics, deeper than I would go on my YouTube channel. One of the things that I plan to do, haven't quite launched it. The Substack is launched, but this feature on Substack isn't launched yet, which is some live stream or live discussions, in-person discussions with members of my Substack to actually do deep dive discussions of maybe specific books or specific authors, the kinds of things that I enjoy doing, but are for a different kind of audience.
Mhm.
than what I want my YouTube channel to be targeted at.
Interesting.
So that's has led me to, as I said, create content, trying to get at least something up once a week on my Substack. That's been a pretty reasonable goal for mine, which has not been a reasonable goal on my YouTube channel. I'm doing well if I can get something once a month on my YouTube channel. So this just is a way for me to explore more of my personal library, some of the different nooks and crannies that I it'll take me a very long time to get to if I have to do them all on my YouTube channel. I'm just too slow on YouTube.
Yeah, well, obviously, you're doing an amazing job, and now being well over, I think, 40,000 subscribers on YouTube, you have, in my view, achieved that critical mass you mentioned. And I think, and I hope that a lot of your viewers will come back and watch, and I know I will, the videos that perhaps are not of the types of books that they're reading now, but get introduced to new stuff. I'm looking forward to your historical
Yeah.
videos, definitely horror as well, but historical probably I'm a bit more interested in. I'd like to read more of. I've enjoyed it in the past. Now it's more science fiction is my thing, but I also want to. So I'm will be looking for inspiration, like you said. And one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about how long it took you to put together that video, you mentioned 2 years of intense reading and really 10 years in the making. And this is like kind of coming full circle from the beginning of this video. I think at the beginning of this video, in the introduction, I said something that there are, booktubers and there are booktubers. And that was a perfect way of encapsulating that idea of how much thought and work goes into it. And yeah, it's amazing. So I really
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you. I mean, I don't want my channel to end up with hundreds and hundreds of videos. I don't, because things get lost when there's so much content on a channel. I want people to be able to browse my channel and find a topic that strikes their fancy. They're like, "Oh, wow, that looks really cool," or "That's something that interests me." And it's easier to do that if it's not cluttered up with a lot of smaller or inconsequential topics,
Book haul videos.
like book haul videos, which, I mean, that's clutter
Yeah,
from my perspective. Now, I understand a lot of people do enjoy those, and I'm not in any way criticizing people who enjoy watching those, because people can watch those and get ideas from just watching book hauls. Like, hey, I didn't know about that book. You're learning about that book, but they're really not learning much about the book because the person who just bought the book hasn't read it either.
yeah,
So all they're learning about is, okay, here's a book title and here's a book author and here's maybe what the jacket blurb says.
yeah. That's a cool cover, and yeah.
Right. I
Uh,
mean, there's not a lot of value there. There is some value though.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I think the idea is really there are different approaches, and everyone who's on this platform maybe has, and some just put a little bit more thought into it than perhaps others. But for me, just to say, it's for me this journey is really more of self exploration in the sense that I've been wanting to journal more, and I'm struggling to journal to write. I do it, but I almost look at this as a way of journaling my reading journey in a way, talking about books that I've read, doing wrap ups at the end of the month. Once in a while, I don't do a lot because I don't buy books in bulk. Like there's some science fiction and good friends of mine who buy a lot of books. And then these book hauls are like 150 books in a box and they just like go through them. I don't do that, but I've done some book haul videos when there are some books that I wanted to highlight that I picked up recently. But it's more of a journey. It's kind of journaling that
Right.
reading journey.
You're right. And there are different types of booktube channels.
Yeah.
There are booktube channels that are really, they are social channels. And so book hauls can be a way of having a conversation with the people you are in a kind of quasi-social, parasocial type relationship. And that can be very rewarding in helping to strengthen or solidify that relationship if that's the goal. And so I don't mean to be critical of that at all, because I think that's a wonderful thing that many channels are able to do, is it is allowing them to connect with more people and broaden their
Right.
network of friendships. I mean, I am a bit of a social media skeptic. I'm
Mhm.
not on social media. I mean, YouTube really is my, or has been the limits of my social media. Now I'm on Substack, which is going to be a little more social than I'm typically comfortable with,
Okay.
but I'm I'm learning the ropes there. But
John,
I, you know,
Discord also.
right. I mean, I participate in a couple of Discord servers, but I don't have a Discord
Right.
server of my own.
Right.
And so I'm, for me, my channel isn't a social channel. It's
Hmm.
an educational channel. I mean, that always from the beginning, I structured it to be just informative, hopefully introducing ideas, books, topics, authors to people in ways that maybe they hadn't been exposed to before. And that was outside the echo chamber of BookTube. And you have some that are more entertainment focused. That they're sort of social, but they're really more just looking for clicks for entertainment purposes.
Hmm.
Where the viewers aren't really engaging with the channel. The viewers are just engaging with the channel's content for entertainment purposes.
Hmm.
That's a different type. It serves a useful purpose because there are viewers who like that kind of thing. That's not my focus. And so, I mean, the real sweet spot in some respects might be the channel that can combine all three of those well, and that would be a an incredible task.
Hmm.
The person who would be able to really do that well would be an amazing person, amazing channel.
Well, I think
I'm not up to that. I'm not
well, I was
capable of doing all three of those in a channel.
well, it's not. It's certainly not easy, but I think out of the aspects that you'd have to have, like we talked off camera a little bit about. We talked about a few things before we started. We talked about Jimmy Nuts, how good he is with those live videos, and how engaged he is with his community. In the comment section, we talked about him. He's great at conversations like this, and yeah, just amazing. But I think the one thing that is most difficult to obtain is what you already have, which is this didactic, this knowledge base, and this idea of wanting to share that, and then perhaps, I mean, who knows which way the road will take you. We never know for sure, even though you are very kind of directed and you know where you want to take the channel, which is awesome. But I think if you wanted to open it up a little bit more, having that most difficult aspect, having that knowledge, great knowledge of history and the books behind you to show and to back it up, I think you would be the person to achieve that trifecta, that merging of all these booktubers into one. And you're great in conversation too, and you're the easiest interview, because all I have to do is like throw one question, and then like you can go
And I'll talk forever.
yeah, you're amazing. So
I
ridiculous.
apologize. I'm probably the longest one of these that you've done so far.
Oh
So I'm maybe not setting a good standard here.
no, this is awesome. I'm enjoying
But
it.
I mean, I am looking to, as I said, explore doing some live streams of my own in the future,
Perfect.
not too distant future. I like the format. I like the conversation aspect of it because I think, as we've been just talking today, that this is a way to explore a variety of different topics and bounce ideas off one another and
Yeah.
be able to see things a little differently through someone else's eyes in ways that you don't necessarily get from a monologue video. So
Right.
my videos are monologues, and I hope they're useful, but ultimately there's a limit to how useful they can be. And I try to make the comment section of my videos useful because I get a lot of questions in my comments, and I try to answer questions with a fair amount of detail, as much as I can. But it's also quite time consuming. And in many respects, it's easier just to have a conversation like
Yeah.
this to get some of that same information out there. I don't know how much of that will be on my YouTube channel versus on my Substack. There definitely will be a lot of that on my Substack at some point in the not too distant future. Some of it will probably make its way onto my YouTube channel, but not all of it. We'll see. It sort of depends on what really works well on Substack. Substack's sort of my experimental phase. I'm doing a little trial and error there to see what kinds of formats, what kinds of topics, what kinds of different kinds of content I can make that provides value to people, and getting feedback from them. I can workshop some of these things to maybe turn them into content for my channel.
That's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to all of that, and I will link all the links that we had talked about. It is going to be a long list for those who want to visit Library Ladder and do a deep dive. You will be spending quite a bit of time enjoying amazing videos with a lot of inspiration.
Let me just make your job easier.
Yeah.
You can just include a link to my channel homepage, or the video homepage for my channel, because I only have about 50 videos.
Yeah, that's
actual videos in my video tab. They're only about 50, so it's not that hard to sort of scroll through them and find something, rather than trying to pull out all of the ones and list them all.
You're such a nice guy.
And if you want to put a link to my Substack, I would love to.
Of course,
love it if you'd have a link to that.
Of course.
But that'll simplify things.
Of course. Yeah. Well, and you're on top of everything else, you're such a nice guy. You're trying to make my life easier. I appreciate that. So we will put those links in, and I hope everyone who's watching, especially everyone who's watching till the end now, will do a deep dive and binge watch if you haven't been watching Library Ladder's videos, and visit the Substack as well. Of course, a lot of interesting content coming up in the future, and I'm glad that you're not going anywhere. In fact, you're doubling down. And that's awesome to hear.
And I'm not abandoning science fiction or fantasy and for future content. I thought I made that pretty clear in my earlier videos, but I have gotten a few comments suggesting that I've abandoned fantasy and science fiction, the thing that brought most of my audience in the first place. It's like, no, I haven't abandoned it. I'm just diversifying. I'm adding more stuff that I think you might like if you just give it a try.
Yeah. Well, I certainly will. I've always been a fan, even if I didn't comment a whole lot, but I watched, I think, most of your videos. So I appreciate the fact that I was able to do this in person with you. And I know your time is valuable, and I truly appreciate the 2+ hours that we've spent chatting about science fiction, books, all these various topics. And I'm sure we'll talk again. I'm looking forward to it. Anything you'd like to add at the end of this video, Bridger?
Thank you very much, Bart. This has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate the invitation and just the opportunity to get to know you here.
Yeah, same. Thank you so much. So that's it. That's the end of episode number 8 of Why Sci-Fi. Another episode a month from now. Bye.